Hey everyone, we are back with another episode of WWBTD. What would the behavior team do? As you can see, it is a party today. It's the last week before break, and we just wanted to get as many people as possible in here, as you can see. So a few familiar faces, as you know, Jen, Joy, and Ashley. And then we have a ton of people from the Gifted and Talented team, or GT, and they each do something a little bit different, so I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. But before we get to that, I would love to start with a little icebreaker, as we always do. And I will call on people so people don't talk over each other. But I would love to know, the holidays are pretty much upon us, and no matter what you celebrate, typically people come together over some sort of food dish, right? So I would love to know what's like one food that you're either excited about eating or making. And I will start with Joy.
Ooh, fun. So many food traditions, but we always, so New Year's Eve, which will come and hopefully bring in a whole different kind of year, but we do fondue. And I was just teasing my kids. I'm like, oh, is that just dipping into each other's germs? But we're already living together, so.
Good, so family only fondue.
Family only fondue.
Yeah, awesome. And so when I call on someone who is a guest, feel free to say your name and kind of maybe a really brief description of what you do. And then we'll kind of dive into the meat of it. So Vanessa, what about you?
Well, I'm not going to be with a bunch of family this year, but I'm going to be around and with my son part of the time. And I often do Chinese food and movies around Christmas. So, no one needs me to be cooking. So
Awesome.
That could make a ruined holiday spirit. But, I work in the Gifted and Talented department, especially with the charter schools. And I also do some work, on the side as well, as far as testing students and working with, we have a Gifted and Talented Leaders of Color and Allies. So I've been very involved in the field for a long time.
Awesome. Looking forward to diving in there. Perfect. Cecilia, what are you looking forward to?
Well, this is a very special holiday for me. It's my fourth holiday in Denver, and I have my mom with me this year. So I'm looking forward to all her cooking and baking, because like Vanessa said, nobody wants me to be cooking. So we're very happy. I'm Cecilia. I work at Bryant Webster Dual Language. I'm an ECE teacher, and I'm just starting my journey in the GT world. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. Ashley, what are you looking forward to eating over this?
What I am looking forward to eating, this is something we do on Christmas as well as New Year's. Now, this is my favorite food. Okay, one of them. You know I like to eat. This is one of my favorite foods. Greens and neck bones. And I feel like that's my job now. Like, I'm really territorial because my grandpa gave me the stamp. So once grandpa gave me the stamp, that's my job. So greens and neck bones is what I look forward to the most.
Carlita, I saw you got very excited. Do you need to comment on this?
Oh yeah, and a piece of cornbread, because you got to stop the juice and the greens juice. Yes.
Okay. Well, what about you? Since you already, what are you looking forward to, Carlita?
I am. So I have a Jamaican family. My husband is Jamaican, and we don't celebrate Christmas. We celebrate Kwanzaa. So every year we do an annual Kwanzaa breakfast. And last year he made curry goat, and my husband is the best at making curry goat. So I am looking forward to eating that on Kwanzaa Day.
Oh wow! Okay, very cool. Stacy, what are you looking forward to cooking or eating?
So in my family, we have a tradition that every Christmas Eve we make chili and oyster stew. So we have one of the two. I usually eat the chili because the oysters, like, I don't like the texture, but so that's been a tradition that we've had as long as I can remember. So it's not one of my favorite foods, but it's definitely something that like tells me that it's the holidays. So,
Yeah.
and I'm from the Gifted and Talented team, and I'm the assessment coordinator. So I do all of our testing.
Awesome. Cool. And then is it Shalila?
You are so great. Yes, it is.
Awesome.
You just don't know how many times people say my name wrong. So I was super excited about that. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yay. So the dish that I am like, I'm very much like Ashley, where I'm stamped to make the macaroni and cheese because, yeah, that could be made very wrong very many times. But I make it right, so I'm excited to make that again for Christmas.
So question, is it baked mac and cheese?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
What else, right? Yeah, all right. I'll just make
Right. And I have a nonprofit called SCD Enrichment Program, and we recruit and support students of color in gifted education for middle school and high school students.
Oh, wonderful. And then Jen.
So typically, my family, we celebrate, if I'm back home in Miami, we would celebrate Noche Buena, which is the night before, so it's Christmas Eve. And we would do a big lechon, and you cook it in something called a caja china. And that's like the thing to do, and that's what we usually eat. And so I'm really gonna miss that this year. But definitely a tradition that I do with my kids is we bake cookies. I mean, it's like cookie extravaganza. I mean, there is no dieting whatsoever around here these days. We started last weekend, and we'll continue.
So there's going to be more cookies baked. Is that what I'm hearing?
More cookies. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Santa needs cookies too. So
True. Okay. Yeah. So for me, I've got latkes on the mind. Potato latkes. It's, it is Hanukkah right now, and although I also celebrate Christmas, they're just so good. And I'm not newly, but like I'm vegan now, and this will be the first Hanukkah that I will be vegan, and so I'm trying to figure out how the heck to substitute those delicious eggs in the latkes. So that's my mission for the break. And so without further ado, let's jump in. So I know everyone's kind of briefly introduced themselves, and I really want to know more of what you each do. But just for some people in the audience, can we, maybe Vanessa, you can explain like what is gifted and talented, and maybe the difference between that and then twice exceptional?
Sure. So with gifted and talented, we're really looking at advanced cognitive skills, which a lot of times brings a lot of misconceptions. Kids or adults and teachers even will think, oh, that's the student that gets, straight A's, or they're always at the top of the class. And it's really not about that. It's really about a way of seeing the world, maybe making connections, a creativity, advanced vocabulary, being a strong leader. There's a lot of different traits within that, and there's particular assessments that we use for that. But it gets to be complex, and it gets to be a challenge for, I think, those that aren't in the field for a while to figure out how to navigate that and what exactly it means and doesn't mean. A lot of times gifted students, especially gifted students of color, can be misidentified. So there are traits that are gifted that also can fall into the special education category if their needs aren't being met, like ADHD, or a lot of excitability, maybe less sleep, more energy than others, being very, very emotional, sometimes being defiant, because for a lot of gifted kids, there's a strong sense of justice. And so if they don't think that the teacher or the adults in the room are being fair or appropriate, they're going to let them know. And so, I think all the stereotypes we think of, I always think of like the Big Bang Theory, right? That was a popular show that was on until recently. And it just really kind of reinforced all of those stereotypes. And yet we know that certainly a student can be twice exceptional, meaning they both have a disability and they're gifted. That's quite common. But a lot of times also gifted students, especially gifted students of color, are more likely to be misidentified as having a disability when in fact it's gifted traits. And the public is not looking at it through that lens, right?
Interesting. Yeah, just kind of, since we are on the behavior team, I mean, we probably see this manifest as those externalizing behaviors, right? And like, I remember there was one case, and I think I actually ended up referring the student to you folks. We were looking at it through a lens of actually autism. Like maybe the student was on the spectrum, which was really interesting because, if you come in searching for certain traits, you're going to find them, right? But then it's like, but something like wasn't quite meshing. We're like, what? I don't know if it is, but what is it? And then we had that awesome training with you. And I realized, I was like, GT, it fits. So I don't know, that really resonated, just those overlying, those symptoms, or that's not even the correct word, but those things that we observe. And so it's really helpful just getting some of that more information, so we're looking at it in different lenses.
Well, and hopefully with the gifted piece, then it becomes, it's strengths focused, right? So a lot of these kids, their whole lives might be about what's wrong or what the disability is. And when you can flip it on its head and go, no, it's really, these are some gifts. They don't always feel like gifts, right? They need the right environment. They need the right nurturing. But yeah, that's another disability type. Learning disabilities like dyslexia, autism spectrum, all of those disability types, certainly there are many students that are twice exceptional and are also gifted, or sometimes are just gifted and have those unique traits, and it's not a disability at all. It's been misidentified.
Gotcha. Yeah, Carlita, I saw you nodding your head a lot when when she was talking about students who might like speak up against teachers. Do you have some examples there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My son, I'm an autism mama bear. My son is autistic, so I definitely can relate on that end. I did have a student a while ago who was twice exceptional, but she was identified so late. So when I came in, I was like advocating for her because she didn't have access to accelerated programming because of her behavior, which is another stereotype. Like, you can't be in accelerated courses if you're behaving this way. And she was discriminated against because of her behavior. So when I came onto the team, I started to really advocate for her and really bring awareness to her about what her rights are as a gifted student and how we're going to have to work together in order for you to be in these classes. So we did try her out in these classes. Her disability did manifest itself. However, before she moved on to go to another school, we actually did qualify her as a twice exceptional student. So she was able to have her 504 plan and her ALP going into another setting that was a little bit better for her. But she would tell you right away if she didn't agree with what you were doing. She was definitely a huge, I say, some people may say it was disrespectful, but I say that she was a huge advocate for herself. And the loudest students in the room are the ones who need the most support. And that was definitely the case for her. So yeah, I absolutely agree with what Dr. Ewan is saying.
Arlene, I have a follow-up question to that. When you say, how old was the student? Because you said we caught this a little bit too late or later.
Yes, the student was already credit deficient. So I think she was supposed to be a junior, a sophomore or junior at the time that I came on. And no one had identified her as twice exceptional until that time. So the first year I came on, I was really advocating for her to get a 504 plan. However, our team was just like, we need to do more assessments. We need to do da-da-da. And maybe it's because I just have an eye, these are my babies. So I just have an eye for the things that they need. So it just kind of takes a little bit longer. They were like, we need to do more assessments. Da-da-da. So, we went through that process and she was able to be identified before she actually ended up going to a different school. But I just feel so horrible that she wasn't identified earlier because her programming could have been better. She probably would have been a little bit more successful. But yeah, this happens to our kids a lot. So with our group and just the work that we're doing in the gifted community can help change some of that narrative and help to really have our kids be represented and for them not to be misidentified.
Is it pretty typical that we don't catch it until high school? No.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, starting out in middle school, you know, a lot of kids will say, and I know Shalita can back me up with this, a lot of kids will say, oh, yeah, I was gifted in elementary school, but I wasn't gifted anymore in middle school. And we're just like, wait a minute, what? You're always
I've heard that, yeah.
that never leaves you. So that just speaks to programming, which is what we are very, very passionate about with our group, is making sure that students have that advanced programming and things that's individualized, for them. So yeah, it really does happen in secondary, which is why we are huge advocates for like secondary gifted education and even special education, because that's my background too. So yeah, it happens a lot.
How does that identification get slipped through the cracks? And I don't, Stacey, you were shaking your head that I don't know if you want to address that.
Well, I mean, ideally, we like to catch students in elementary school, because the earlier we can catch a student for gifted identification, the earlier their needs can be met, and that, you know, they'll have advocacy along their educational journey. But unfortunately, a lot of this has to do with state law, because you were talking about that this was a junior in high school. So state law changed in 2015. Where we have identifications through universal screenings. The law changed a lot. So with our high schoolers, we tend to see that there's a few that did end up getting stuck in the cracks somewhere. So we're doing a lot of data management on the back end now to go back and try to find those students who we missed through a lot of ridiculous data dives. We literally, Vanessa can tell you, we literally spend hours in front of computers just like looking through student data just to try to catch it. But since 2015, we do universal screenings in kindergarten and second grade with the hopes that we catch some students early. And we're also placing more emphasis, at least over the past couple years, on talent pool development. So placing students who are showing or demonstrating some sort of gifted abilities, and they may not be formally identified yet. They may not have popped on the universal screening that we do with the Naglieri Nonverbal Abilities Test, but they're definitely showing a spark of something. It could be a parent nomination. It could be a teacher nomination. That's commonly what we see, is like a teacher who sees something in a student, and they can be placed in talent pools, so they'll receive services while they're in process of becoming identified. Because the state of Colorado, you have to have a body of evidence for an identification. So that's the other piece of why this takes so long, is because we have to have multiple data points to just demonstrate that the students have that gifted ability. And that's part of the reason why you tend to see, especially with older students who weren't around for this 2015 measure for the universal screenings, why they kind of slip through the cracks a little bit, because it does take time to build that body of evidence. In most cases, it requires an observation scale. It requires a cognitive data piece. In certain circumstances, there's 3 different pathways. It may also require an achievement score and scores over time. And if we're looking at talent, that requires an entirely different set of criteria, which would include a portfolio showing work over time. So we have to show over time. So that's a big piece of this. And there are times where our identifications don't happen as quickly as we would like. But we have to follow the law, which is, it sometimes can be a barrier.
Well, and I think that's where some of the, prior to 2015, when there weren't universal screenings, we saw actually parents are better identifiers than teachers a lot of times. So there's very little training for teachers still, and we're making big progress in training teachers across the district and beyond. Hundreds of teachers have been going through our gifted internal courses now, but many don't know what they're looking for. And so especially, and we find that even more so in our schools that have higher concentrations of poverty as well, right? They're so focused on kind of a deficit mindset that they're not seeing all of the strengths that these students have. And then of course, they're not getting the services. So then as they get older, they might not be able to show it because they weren't given the appropriate education for those years. with Carlitha's background, which is mine as well, that's pretty common, that gifted and special education, and it can mask. So if I have a very high IQ, but then I also, let's say, have a learning disability, I might look like an average student on a lot of my tests, right? And maybe I'm working hard and I'm getting C's or the periodic B, and they go, this student's totally average. They're not gifted, and it's because the two mask each other. But you know, before those universal screens, when it was just teachers nominating by and large, and then all those stereotypes pop back up again. So they were nominating these kids that were often high achievers, but were not gifted. And they were also nominating kids that fit all the stereotypes. So, you know, lots of white kids, more boys than girls, things like that as well. So the universal screenings have really helped to start move us on the right track of getting all of our kids identified.
And I think our department's doing a lot to try to move past those stereotypes. We're initiating things where we're actually looking for students who may have behavior disruptions, and saying, maybe there's something more to this than maybe the kid's bored. Because a lot of times if students are bored and sitting at their desks and they don't like the content, they're going to lash out and do something that they're going to like to do. And unfortunately, that oftentimes ends up in a referral. So we're looking at maybe different ways of looking at students and observing them in the classroom. Unfortunately, a lot of our observation scales tend to be focused on that high achiever kind of, and these are nationally normed scales, so we have to use them because the state requires it. But these tend to be scales that are a little bit more on the side of positive behaviors rather than negative behaviors. So we're looking at different scales as well to try to see what we could use that would be more culturally responsive, because these scales are also very much in alignment with like a white middle class mindset, but also thinking about what kinds of negative gifted behavior, because we do have negative gifted behaviors. What kinds of negative gifted behaviors are students manifesting, and can we use those and try to figure out how we can help that student?
There you go.
I was going to add that we also have second language barrier, right? So
absolutely.
tests are hard, or just students that can't, express themselves, or a dual language schools or bilingual schools where, you think that the language is enough challenge for, our GT students, and it's not the case. So that's also a big barrier in identifying and all the paperwork that comes with it.
And that was for your daughter, right? Because she was still learning English when you first got here.
Right, and she had to, to get rid of all her English as a second language learner before she was able to be to get her GT services, and she was already identified, but she was getting an average grade in language because it wasn't her first language, so we had to wait a year for that.
So as a parent, like I'm a parent of DPS students, and I'm just curious, like, so let's say I have a kiddo of mine, and maybe they don't test really well on this universal exam, and maybe because, like what you're saying, there's a lot of bias maybe coming from the school, just because they haven't learned any of this stuff yet, or how to identify a student. And what would a parent do if I thought my kid had some sort of natural ability or talent or giftedness, based on how well I know my child? What would a parent do to nominate their student, their child, for some sort of,
So Stacy has, she manages a lot of our website, but if you just Google even DPS Gift and Talented, there's a way to nominate for some additional testing. And then every single school has at least one person at the central office, and or usually also someone within the school that's in charge of gifted and talented. So on our website as well, you can look up your individual school and who to reach out to there. Beyond that, then you can reach out to our office as well. But it is difficult, I think, with Cecilia as well. I think if she hadn't had these additional trainings herself, and if we hadn't started doing some classes together and so on, would she have gotten right? There needs to be advocacy, and unfortunately that's a a challenge still. So she was able to advocate for her child. I know Shalila is able to advocate because, and Carlita, all of us, right? Because we have that background. But then, yeah, for the other parents, I think it can be challenging, but we do have a lot of outreach happening. So there's an easy way to look up and get to us. I was going to mention with Shalila, because we were talking about universal screenings and assessments prior, she's doing some really cool things to develop some screeners that are more culturally responsive right now as well, with some other experts in our field, which is exciting.
Yeah, so I'm excited for this because it really, like what you were talking about, Dr. Ewing and Stacy, it talks about that cultural piece that is missing from screeners. Mm-hmm. So I created a tool based off of like 40 years of research from experts in the field that connected the cultural piece to actual gifted characteristics that students can show. So it's specific to like African Americans, to Latino students, to Native Indigenous students, and even to Arabic students or Middle Eastern, North African students. And so I've created this tool. I've used it a couple of times, and we have identified, not officially, but we've looked at a total now of 90 students that may not have been looked at before. So that cultural piece is super important to me. It's like a passion of mine. Within my program, we learn like ethnic history in order to make our students proud of who they are, so that it can even more increase like their identification with their culture, which I feel like can enhance those gifted qualities.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much for your work in that area.
Yeah.
Carlita, I saw that you put something in the chat, and I didn't want to get distracted. Is that still something you want to speak on? Because otherwise, I also want to know what the name of your program is, because I don't know if you actually explicitly said it.
No, I actually haven't. I was just touching on, because we were talking about like the disability areas and things that students struggle with. And so perfectionism and anxiety is what I see in the work a lot. I actually had a student who literally could not come to the front door of the school. So we had to, well, she was on a 504 plan, so she was twice exceptional too. She would get all her work done and everything, but it was literally just coming to the door of the school that just raised her anxiety level. So there are so many different cases with students, and so it's very important to individualize for them, and the programming is very important. Like, she was taking these very accelerated courses. She was doing very well. She was super brilliant, but again, just coming to the school increased her anxiety. So we really have to look at our students inside and out and ensure that the programming is set up for them appropriately, and that that if they are twice exceptional, we really need to look into that to make sure that they either have an individualized education plan or IEP or a 504 plan to support the disability piece.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to that. And this is why I think it's so important to start with GT and ECE, because as a mom and educator, I can see the social, emotional, like you say, all that anxiety we have. And in ECE is where they learn all these tools. You can, manage yourself, control your emotions, get to know yourself and how you deal with situations. And if you have these tools before, your school life and everything, I think it's very important. So this is why when I started learning about GT, I was so passionate, and I'm like, we have to start sharing this information at the earliest age we can. Exactly for what you said, Carlita. Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that too, because this is why GCLCA was founded. because we do have a lot of leaders of color, but we all kind of feel like we're on an island, you know, because there are not a lot of GC educators of color, and there's not a lot of GC like leaders of color. So Vanessa reached out to me and she said, should we just like start a group so that we can all connect? And I said, yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. And then GCLCA was born, and now we have a whole lot of members, and it's just a wonderful organization to bring awareness and advocacy for families so they can have more information about what's going on in the GC community for their students who either are already identified, and we can talk about programming, or there are children who may not be identified right now, and just like helping them to advocate and navigate through the steps of going through the identification process. So this group is amazing. We are beautiful, passionate women right now. Not saying we discriminate against men, but it's all women right now. And our group is very passionate about our gifted students of color having the right types of programming and being identified and being a part of the GC community.
Yeah.
I have a question. You guys mentioned advocacy a lot, and like all the misconceptions that people carry when they hear GT. And so, as a parent, like what advice would you give to a parent to be able to advocate for their child from like the beginning to the end? So whether that's being able to refer and say, no, I would like for my child to be tested, all the way through the end of the process. So when they do get their ALP or IEP, like what are some things that's like, no, this should be in there. This is what, like, this is by law, what is required. This is what should be given to your child. Like what type of things should parents look for, especially if they're not really familiar with, you know, this area. Like what are some things that some advice that you can give for parents that they can use to be able to take into their schools and advocate for their students?
That's a really great question, Ashley. What I would say, and that's another reason why I created the Word Agency LLC, because with my agency, I really help families be able to advocate for their students to be able to have like accelerated courses and things of that nature. For me, I am really passionate on the programming side, because I'm really passionate about students, especially in secondary, being able to have access to those accelerated options earlier, like being able to have access to honors classes, accelerated classes, concurrent enrollment, and things of that nature. Because what I saw and what I've heard at the national like gifted conferences was that students in more affluent communities were graduating with associate's degrees and high school diplomas. And I'm just like, wait, hold on. Our students need access to this. So really bringing information is powerful for families. And then even in our presentation that we did for Black families, we had families create or tell us their vision. What is your vision for your child? What does gifted look like for you, for your student? And then for them to go back and observe what is happening with programming and services for their student, so that they can see if their observation really aligns with their vision. And then after that, we can talk about specific things that you can advocate for within your school community to make sure that your gifted student is receiving the service or really receiving what you see in your vision. I think that's very important, especially in middle school, because like we said before, students will say, well, I was gifted in elementary, but I'm not gifted anymore in middle school. And a lot of that has to do with programming and having that access to acceleration earlier. So we really have started bringing awareness to that, and just talking about how services and programming looks in different spaces in middle school and in high school, because it looks slightly different, but you can still have access to the same level of acceleration. And just to end my thought, one student that I grade skipped when he was in 7th grade, I'm now working with him and he's a senior. And he was able, he's a senior now, right? He grade skipped, and there's a lot of like misconception about grade skipping, and people have their own theories around that. But I'm a huge advocate for it because I think that it really works, especially for our students of color. And when you talk to parents, they really want that for when you talk to our parents of color, they really want that for their kid. And I know Shalita talks a lot about how some students feel and, equating brilliance with whiteness and that type of thing, and which is why some students don't really advocate for being accelerated courses and things of that nature, but that's a whole nother thing. But I was saying that to say that, so he was able to receive like $44,000 in scholarships and things of that nature. So he's going to be able to like close the opportunity gap and the economic wealth gap in his family due to that level of acceleration earlier. So that's why I'm very, very passionate about it, and really am passionate about bringing awareness to families about those opportunities, because it can make a great impact for our kids and for their future.
I'm so glad you said that, Carlita. Yes, because that's honestly literally why I created my nonprofit, because I was that gifted kid from 1st grade to 12th grade that was one of the only people of color in my classes. And I stuck through it because my mom doesn't play any games, and neither does my older brother. So I really didn't have a choice. But there's a lot of students and parents that are like, I don't want my babies in that environment where they have to feel like they have to be twice as great, because brilliance is equated to whiteness. And I talk to my kids all the time, and they say things like, I don't feel like I was prepared in middle school in order to take AP or concurrent enrollment classes. I want representation. I want people to look like me. Our kids are super introspective. They know what they want. But if they don't see what they want in our programming, then they may not take advantage of those opportunities that are there. And to answer your question, Ashley, I always advocate for my parents to to gather evidence for that body of evidence that Stacey was talking about. So if you see that your child, like my son, he won like 4 championships in football, like that, that could count for that that talent part. If they are like nationally competing, that is a part of that talent.
It's a data
part.
point.
Yeah, it is a data point.
That's a data point. We can use national data, national awards. Yeah, absolutely. That's a data point.
Yes. And I think once we realize that, because especially our kids, like Black kids, they manifest a lot of their giftedness in the talent areas because they don't identify with the educational area. And so I'm like a huge proponent for that. Like, keep everything, document everything, and bring it to your teachers in the staff in the school and say like, hey, I am seeing this and I'm going to continue to advocate for my child, and never give up.
And I think knowing that parents can fill out those surveys and nominate their children themselves, because again, a lot of times parents are much more accurate than the teachers are, right? So don't discount what you know as a parent, and get those surveys and get the types of data that we can use on your own. We're here to help in our office as well.
I love that.
Go
ahead. Please go.
I was going to say, in our nomination form, because yes, we do universal screening in kindergarten, 2nd and 6th grade. We test roughly 20,000 students every year, which we're trying to do right now during a pandemic and remotely. It's been interesting. Yeah, Vanessa, thumbs up. But the other thing is that families can advocate, and they can nominate their children for testing if they're in off screener levels. So 1st grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and higher. We have tested a few high schoolers, but ideally they're already identified by that point. That's our hope. But families can always sign up for testing. We do 2 rounds of testing. We do fall testing, and then we do spring testing. And they'll have the opportunity, if they qualify in the 95th percentile or higher, to participate in GT programming. It might be through Talent Pool while they're building that body of evidence. But that 95th percentile or higher can be used as a data point in that body of evidence that we're going to be building for identification. And students in the 97th percentile or higher will be eligible to attend one of our magnet sites if they choose to opt in. It's completely optional. And one thing I want families to know is that we do have GT in every school. It just looks different in every school because we're a site-based district. So every school is required to have a 0.25 teacher, a GT teacher on staff. So they may not be doing much more than the compliance work, but there is a point of contact there. Find who that point of contact is and start to get to know them. I think that's my biggest piece of advocacy, is learn who your GT point of contact is and build that relationship with them, because they're going to be able to get you those tools that you need to start figuring out where your kid lands within all of this world of GT.
Are there any like resources just off the top of your head that are like good books or websites that parents could go to just to get some more information?
I like the Gifted Kid Survival Guide. There's also a Gifted Teen Survival Guide. When gifted kids don't have all the answers, they're pretty inexpensive. They're available, Amazon or wherever. They've been around for a while. We've got some good free resources on our district website as well. And then NAGC, which is the National Association for Gifted Children, has a lot of resources. Hoagie's Gifted is this warehouse of articles and written really for professionals, but especially families as well. And it's kind of old school, but if you use the search bar, there's thousands and thousands of articles there. And then Send Gifted is the social emotional needs for the gifted. And that covers a lot of those things about the emotional sensitivities, sensory, psychomotor, right? That moving sensitivity, all of those types of emotional things that Cecilia mentioned as well. Those are often the first thing that pop up, and it can look like, what's this early childhood student struggling with, and really it's a part of their giftedness. So those are good resources.
Awesome.
So these tools, it sounds like they cover some things that parents can do at home for their children. Yes? Okay, awesome. That was actually my next question. We'll certainly post those on our website when we upload this episode. Thank you for that.
I also wanted to add for our presentation for Black families, because our work is really rooted in the Bill of Rights for gifted students of color. That is another resource that families can look over to see like what their rights are as a parent of a gifted student of color. So
yeah, and that was created by, like, I call them the OGs of Black gifted and talented. They've been around in the game and they know what they're talking about, and they do not play when it comes to getting more of our students into gifted and talented. And I think that kind of talks to like why is gifted and talented so important for students who are identified for gifted and talented. And it really does allow that student to be their whole selves. A lot of times when our students go to the schools, they feel like they have to have a part of them like kind of left behind because it may be misunderstood, or they don't know about their giftedness. They don't know all these quirks and all these things that they do are like gifted traits. And so it's like, let our students be proud of who they are, and let them embrace that, because it's really going to activate that whole gifted child, and for them to be successful in school.
Jalila, I'm so happy you said that, because that I was about to ask that question about like how, again, as a parent, even as an educator, but how because I was that student who, was identified as gifted and then tested into a magnet program and had an experience in 6th grade that shut me completely off. Yeah. And that experience had taught me like it is unsafe to be smart. it is unsafe to be gifted. Like that was unsafe. And that like even in high school, like taking AP classes and then my confidence saying, passing the class with A's or B's and saying, I'm not taking the test because of whatever reason, like that self-sabotage, right? A lot of self-sabotage well into adulthood. And my question is like, how do, as a parent, because my mom didn't know what was going on with me. Like she didn't, or, you know, my dad, like they didn't know. I don't even know if they would have even known what, like recognized that any change had happened. It's just like, I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know, like maybe she's a teenager and maybe that's what it is. But there was a piece of me that was gone, that felt unsafe. And so how do you empower your child in their gifts, in this identification? How do you empower them to show up, like you said, to be able to show up exactly as they are, to be able to show up and be who you are and be proud of that and continue in that and not self-sabotage? What can you give to parents to be able to do that?
I want to start with the students because I think the students will help the parents advocate for them. So like a lot of my students are very much like you were, Ashley, and I was, where, you know, we didn't want to like raise our hand in class. I had one student, she was a 10th grader last year, and last school year, but this year of pandemic. But anyway, she said that she was raising her hand in class because she was really confused in something. And, you know, the two students in class were like, oh my goodness, this is just such an easy assignment, like out loud, almost for her to hear. And then she put her hand down and then she was like, I don't want to raise my hand anymore in my AP class. And those are those types of things that are like you said, that damage you and you know, make our students feel like, no, mom, like I know there's something special about me, but I'm not trying to be in those classes. So you know, for my students, again, I kind of like mesh it all together. I feel like that whole child, I can't leave out that cultural piece,
Right.
when I know that is so important for our students. Even our students, like I have a couple of students from the Pacific Islands, and like if you do a little research on Pacific Islands, they their schooling is a bit different. And so it's when you come here from like Marshall Islands or Shook Islands, you have to learn the educational system and you have to learn a different language. So you have like those two, you know, some people may call them barriers, but they're superpowers to me. Especially if you can hold on to that and navigate the American school system and be identified like you are doing something. Because typical students can't even do that are you know, are born here. But I feel like if we can increase that you know, pride within the students to say like, hey, you know, with programs like mine and in advocacy programs, you know, that are like, it's okay to be who you are. I think that can go back to the parents, because I've had a ton of parents reach out to me this summer to say like, my student or my child had your program, and look, I don't know what you're doing, but they're asking me questions and I don't know the answers to these. And then, you know, directing them to those resources that Dr. Ewing was talking about, and, you know, the different like Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented, those like resources really do help. But I think it's like a unified effort. Yes, we do need to help our parents advocate, but we also need to empower our students to advocate for themselves too.
Right.
Especially when they go through situations like that. Like I feel that.
Right.
Also, just adding to that, representation is important. And that's why another reason why we started the group, because when we talk to scholars and families, they are unaware, because the scope of what they're looking at is a lot of white GT leaders, a lot of white GT scholars, a lot of, you know, and they don't see themselves represented in this work. So one, representation matters, but also bringing awareness so that we can be able to dismantle fixed mindsets. Because even people who work in the GT community and work with our students are just like, he's not GT, he didn't get straight A's, just like exactly what Dr. Ewan was saying about some of the myths. And it's just like, that's not the point, right? And that shouldn't be like a limit on that student or like a characteristic of the student, because one, I don't believe in grade shaming, number one, and number two, I do believe that students are more than their grades. So we have to look at the student as a whole child, and then again, just bringing more awareness to the GT community and dismantling these stereotypes and myths, especially about our gifted students of color. And I was a GT student too. I'm from the south side of Chicago. I was a GT student, and GT looks so much different in Chicago and way when I was in school back in the day. So it looks totally different. So again, just if a family member was a GT student and they didn't have a great experience, and actually you're saying that you didn't have a great experience, sharing our untold stories. Because I'm pretty sure that a lot of students and even family members have experienced just what you've experienced, and sharing with each other, bringing awareness, dismantling that fixed mindset is really going to set our GT students present and in the future up for success.
I think connecting with advocates, be that in your school, at the district, through these organizations, so that you're not trying to do it alone, along with the education. I was thinking of, there have been a lot of times where, as I'm going through the list of common gifted and talented traits, most of the time there will be a parent in the audience that will get really moved, and they're like, oh my gosh, right? And there was one dad that, he knew his daughter was gifted, and he came and talked to me after, and he was a big, tough looking guy, and he was crying, and he was, mid-30s, and he said, that entire list was me. And here I was my whole life thinking that, that I was a rotten kid, that I was a rotten guy. And he started crying. I was like, I would get teary even talking about it now, but it was that moving, So I think part of it is also for parents to recognize, that it's often them as well. And it's painful when you know that you should have had a much different experience than what you had.
And that happens a lot of in the Hispanic community too, right? Where you go away, where you don't talk back to your parents, you don't say what you feel. And gifted kids, like we said, they have to say what they feel. They speak up. You definitely, can't hold that. And that is totally taken, as disrespect. And if you don't comply, and if you're not quiet and follow the rules, And again, this is all the information we need to share with parents, and just open those spaces for parents to talk to other parents and say, no, this is not really bad. This is what's going on. Go do this, or look at this other way.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Cecilia, because there are those cultural barriers too that possibly won't allow for your students to speak up for themselves, because it is deemed as disrespectful to be like, Mom, I need better. Like, excuse me, you need. And so I feel like that is a responsibility of the schools to. I always ask the schools that I partner with, like, do you have like, when you have like student orientation, or when you have like back to school night, do you have a section that parents can go to get more information about gifted and talented and speak about those traits? Do you have that? Because every single school should have that. And then you're going to be catching a lot of those, like you talked about, Dr. Ewing, that, 30-odd, parent, or, a student like, oh my goodness, this is me. Or maybe a parent is like, that's my child. And I don't know what was going on with them. And so it's like every school should take it upon themselves to give just as much as you want to have them know a fee for school, or whatever. It should be just as important to give them that information at like a student parent orientation or something like that.
I agree, and we usually have a lot of information on what we're lacking of, or our weaknesses, and how to support here and there, and we have to change the whole mindset and look at the good things, at the good things we can nurture, and we can, the positive things of our kids, the different things.
Yeah.
That's
That
such
sort of goes back to how Vanessa started, saying that, that it's a good thing that we look at this more as not a deficit based, but talent based. My gosh, you guys, this has been so incredible. I feel like, especially, in the behavior team, I'm sure we're all thinking about students that we've been called in on for deployment, and we're like, whoa, that's just a smart kid. And it is such a great lens for our team to have this conversation. So thank you. I don't know, do we want to follow up with any other questions, or Kate, can we just start thinking about putting all these resources together? Because there is so much. You guys are just incredible. I feel like we could talk for another hour.
Yeah, we definitely can act. I'm going to reach out to all of you. We're going to get all of these resources posted. And as Joy said, just thank you so much for taking the time today and this conversation. It was really, really awesome. There's just we just keep getting reminded, in all these episodes, how many incredible people are at DPS doing amazing work for our students and families. So just thank you, all of you, for everything that you do.
Yes.
And
thank you.
Yeah. This was wonderful. I learned so much. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We're loving, there's finally these partnerships too, right? We're doing a lot with the special education department and a lot with the behavior tech team. And I think all of our kids are going to get much further now.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Agree.
All right, everyone. Take care. I'll see you next time. Another episode.